Let's get it started. Huh?
What is up?
Are we back?
We're so back.
Oh, we're back.
We're back, baby.
And we're back in a unique way because it's not just the Deconstruction Zone podcast. It's not just the Progressive Pastor podcast, but it's both and not either or.
Oh, man.
The Deconstructed Progressive Pastors.
That's
we
every
can
progressive
workshop the
pastor.
title. Yeah,
I think it rolls off the tongue, actually.
It doesn't.
No?
No.
Okay.
Well, I think this is going to be fun. We've done this now. This is our second time doing this.
Yeah.
And we just got lunch, hung out, had some great conversation. We said, why not roll this over into some podcasting?
Might as well, yeah.
And it'll be on both of our feeds. So maybe you're someone that only listens to the Progressive Pastor podcast. There's another one, the Deconstruction Zone.
There
Maybe you
is
only
another
listen to
one.
the Deconstruction Zone. There's another one, the Progressive Pastor podcast.
This is true. Welcome into our home.
Look at this. Look at this intersection of humanity happening right here. I mean, we're three white guys, but like the
This is true,
listeners
Yeah.
will,
So the Deconstruction Zone, the last episode we released actually was one the three of us did together.
Yeah.
But we've been really hit or miss. We're about to be relaunching. And so if you're listening to this episode, know that the Deconstruction Zone is resuming weekly episodes in June.
Oh, we're back.
This is going to be great. But here's my thing. People may not remember or know any of us. And if it's your podcast, they may have skipped the episodes I was on with you guys if they didn't listen to the last one we did together. So I thought maybe we introduce ourselves really quick.
Yeah.
I know maybe redundant for the regular listeners. And then just like a check-in of what we got going on.
Yeah,
I love
for
that.
sure.
Yeah.
Why don't you kick us off?
I'll kick us off. So Danny Liebarger, pastor of the Well, a new United Methodist congregation in Weldon Spring, Missouri, so St. Charles County, have the church is kind of note because we were planted as a intentionally LGBTQ plus inclusive church, which as we're talking right now, General Conference for the Methodist Church is happening, and so it looks like the tides are shifting for us to become a
very
more
great way.
inclusive denomination.
Yeah.
But when we started in 2021, that was not an assumption everyone was going to bet on and take to Vegas. You know what I mean?
Right.
So we were maybe bucking the trend there, but happy to be a part of maybe a larger movement. Father of three, married, living the dream, pastor in the Well.
Yeah.
Love that.
I am Kyle Baldwin, director.
Boo.
Ooh, okay.
Sorry.
Director
someone in
of
studio
Family
audience.
Ministries at Concord Trinity United Methodist Church here in St. Louis, South County. Soon to be, depending when we release this, father of one.
Yeah.
At the time of recording, we're 5 weeks away. So
Dang.
that's how I'm doing. You can insert your own emotions there. But I've been at Concord for almost a year now, which is pretty exciting. A replanted former Baptist minister. So nice to be in more progressive spaces that have different voices, and I can use my voice to uplift those. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
I take it.
Greener pastures.
Very
here at
green. It was
Concord.
like deserts behind me. But
Wow.
yeah.
Okay. Biblical.
I thought so. Yeah. Exodus. Boom.
There you go. My name is JT Young. I am also on staff here at Concord Trinity. I oversee all discipleship and missions here at the church. I've been here for coming up on 3 years next month, and also have 3 kids. I'm married to my lovely partner Ames, working on my doctorate at Eden Seminary. All kinds of good stuff happening. So I am tired but good.
Yeah, right. All those things are emotionally and psychologically exhausting.
Yeah.
Understandable.
Yeah. To say the least.
Well, I'm excited to do this. Not only do I enjoy having conversations with the two of you, but I also think the conversations we have, even just the ones we have off the air, but on the air, I think are beneficial for others that are listening, because I think we maybe are having conversations out loud that others are having inside themselves and that are maybe aren't comfortable enough having out loud. And I was just thinking, so I had a conversation with a congregant earlier last week, and the conversation arose about theological non-negotiables, kind of wondering like what does the well stand for? What do you stand for as a pastor? Are those the same? Are those different? Like, you're a Christian, you're United Methodist. Like, what are your theological non-negotiables? And in our church, we don't sign a doctrinal statement. We don't have a beliefs page.
Right.
And that's very intentional. Like, we want to create space for everyone. We have Buddhists and Hindus, we have agnostics and Christians, and we have conservatives and progressives that come into our space. And so we want to create something that embraces our mantra of your seat at the table can't cost someone else theirs. We really want to live that out.
Right.
But it's hard because we are people that seek certainty. And my suspicion is that all of us probably have some of our non-negotiables. And this is what I said in the conversation. I said, like, I have a lot of really strongly held beliefs on things. I don't always share those. Because I don't know that's always my role as the pastor, is to share everything that I believe on everything. But maybe it's to spur on curiosity. Not everyone loves that answer. But the reality is I do have strongly held beliefs, some of which are non-negotiable and some that aren't. And so I was just wondering for you guys, like, and maybe we could go around the room and just say it, but like, do you have things that for you are like theologically uncompromisable, like hills you would die on as far as what you believe from a Christian perspective?
Kyle told me that.
Stop. I don't want to play this game.
I couldn't hold it.
I don't want to play it.
I couldn't hold it in. You were just telling me
It's
about how
never fun.
men need to be leaders of women and women need to submit. You said that was a non-negotiable for you.
Nope. We have new listeners from the Deconstruction Zone listening to this podcast for the first time, and we don't want to scare them away.
Yeah, or paint you in the wrong light.
That's true. Yeah. So please be nice. Kyle, I've never signed off on that statement. This is fake news.
Not to their knowledge.
Yeah.
You do talk a lot about fake news, though. I will say that I had met with our district superintendent at some point last year to kind of work on the.
And for those that don't know, the district superintendent is like the Michael Scott of the Dunder Mifflin denomination.
That's exactly right. Yeah, like a regional manager.
Yeah, they run the branch.
They run the branch,
Yep.
and they manage the other employees, which would be like all the pastors in the area. So I was talking to her kind of about the process of ordination and stuff, and I had said something along these lines of like, I don't this, that, or the other. I don't know what exactly we were talking about, but I was like, I don't hold that super close-handedly or as a non. And she was like, well, what do you hold close-handedly? And I said, Jesus, maybe the Bible. And that was kind of where I left it. And I unpacked that a little bit, but I think I had started from a place a long time ago, and I think I alluded to this when we had recorded our last episode on the Deconstruction Zone, where I was very heavily interested in like the development of a systematic theology and all of those things being correct and all those things being. And not only am I less interested in that type of work, just kind of generally, because I don't find that it always aids toward the things I care about, like liberation and ethics and morality. But I'm less interested in some of the traditional responses to that question. Like I guess atonement. I talked about atonement a while. I was on a panel a month or two ago to talk about Palestine, and I was talking something about somebody asked me a question about like Christian, kind of evangelical Christian theology on end times and this kind of stuff. And I was talking about this concept of atonement and like, this idea that Jesus's death on the cross as this foreordained, eternally predestined sacrifice for the forgiveness of sins. Like I just find it to be bullshit. I refuse to make holy a political execution. Like I just do anybody's execution. And that's what I think Jesus' death was, right? And so, I hold as a non-negotiable, say the dream that Jesus dreamed of a better world, of a just world. But some of the ways that we've theologized Jesus after the fact, and his aspects of his death are things that I think at one point I held very, very close-handedly that has really shifted for me. over the last decade or so.
It's funny that you say that. When I was at my last church, we were in the time of transition, and our senior pastor had just left, so it was right before Christmas, and we did like a big like Christmas ordeal every year, big show, and so they asked me to give like the Christmas message at the end of all of those services, and in that I said that Jesus was murdered. And the backlash that I got from that from so many conservative people at our church was astounding. And which, like, he was.
Yes.
That's how that works. That's like the historical concept of it. Like, you know, if you read it in history books, not even just the Bible.
Yeah.
But B, it's just funny because like I got that line that I used from a Max Lucado devotional, and I'm like, if I would have told these very, very Southern Baptist people that Max Lucado wrote that, I think their whole brain would have just exploded. But I was like, I just ate it. Like it's whatever. Like and the guy who was the interim like was one of my professors who also is pretty progressive on the side of it, and like he used that in his sermon the next Sunday, and like nobody said anything. I was like, this is great. Thanks for just hating on me because I'm 25.
Yeah, you're an easy target.
Exactly.
When you're that age,
Exactly.
So I saw this post from the Reverend Dr. Caleb Lyons, who you may have saw as well.
Okay.
A mutual friend of ours posted it.
Okay.
That Jesus was crucified for standing up to the empire, not to atone for the sins of humanity. And as you said that, I was like, oh, I wonder if you shared that post as well. But is that where you fall belief-wise more? It's like, this isn't an atonement death. This was just like happenstance death. And by happenstance, I mean, like, obviously there were political things that led to it, but there was a theological purpose for it.
Yeah, I think any theological significance we assign to Jesus' death is the result of post theologization, maybe is the best way to put it. It's a result of, you know, his followers in the time afterward trying to make sense of his execution.
Yeah.
I do not subscribe to the belief that Jesus' death was a preordained sacrifice for the sins of humanity. And now, you know, we can talk about sin and what that means, and we can talk about atonement and what that means, and but in this case, the way that this has become, the way that this has been theologized over the last, you know, and relatively early on, you know, in the tradition, this has been happening. It's just, and I think we need to take it for that. I think maybe that's my point, is like, you know, Jesus's followers in the decades following his death trying to make sense of the execution of this guy that they thought was going to be this divine Messiah who was going to usher in a new reality in the here and now that never came.
Right.
I think we need to take it as that, as them trying to make sense of this in the midst of trauma and chaos of their lives, versus us taking it as eternal preordained truth. You know, I think those things are quite separate, actually.
Yeah, wasn't that all what theology is, right? Like, we oftentimes like make it this really big pursuit, but it's like it's making sense of God in the context that we know it, right? Like,
right. It's all contextual. I was just having a conversation with somebody about some of this stuff and how, like, I think there was I used Thomas Aquinas as the example, and you know, this medieval Catholic monk wrote the Summa Theologia, this massive work of theology, and is pointed to as one of the greatest works of theology ever written. And it is a phenomenal, you know, a phenomenal work that very few, if any, people will ever be able to touch. You know, in terms of the quantity and the thought and the process that went into it, but at the same time, and I think Thomas thought that he was writing this kind of the theology for all time, right? This thing that's going to be eternally true. At the same time, though, he was writing it as like a textbook for novices coming into the priesthood that needed instruction in theology. So like even the way that it was still contextual, right? The way that he wrote it, it had a contextual reasoning behind it. And I think we miss that a lot, that all of this stuff is contextual. And as soon as we decontextualize it is when we start to get into
context
trouble.
is very valuable. So as an Enneagram 8, I'm going to ask you a question that I'm asking you because
I don't know which one the 8 is.
We're challengers.
Okay.
I love that. And so this isn't because I necessarily. Well, I'm just gonna ask you the question.
Yeah.
So I have been asked before, and I'm always interested to ask. And you said you're in your meeting with your DS.
Yeah.
Jesus and maybe the Bible.
Yeah.
Those are your non-negotiables.
Yeah.
We just worked our way through a little bit of atonement, and like this is maybe more empire versus preordained.
Sure.
Atonement. Often, and you've probably been asked this question before, and so you likely have your answer ready. But
it's hard to tell so far, honestly.
Well, what? So people, and maybe you've never been asked this before, but I'm not asking because I necessarily need the answer, but I know listeners will ask this.
Sure.
Why does Jesus matter if he didn't have to die to atone for sins? Like, if Jesus is a non-negotiable and his death isn't directly correlated to an atonement, and again, we can get really deep into atonement, like. At a baseline, we're saying like forgiveness of sins, right?
Sure.
Like we're talking like when we all say atonement, that's what we mean.
Yeah.
And there's a ton of different theories on how that works out and how it's executed and how Jesus fits into that. But when we're saying the word atonement, we mean like forgiveness of sins.
Sure.
And so for someone that came up to you like, oh, that's really dope that you believe all those things.
Yeah.
Why does Jesus matter? What are you going to say to them, especially as he's now sitting in one of your 1.5 non-negotiables?
Right. I'll give the same answer that I had received from one of my professors in seminary, and he had talked about Jesus as this apocalyptic prophet that preached an imminent end of the world that never came, who died on the cross crying out for a God who never showed up to save him, but still was a Christian, a devoted Christian, right? This professor was still a devoted Christian in spite of this belief. And I actually don't super disagree with some of this. And so his answer to this question is because Jesus's dream is the only one worth dreaming. And so thinking about it, I've sat with that for a long time and thought about this question, that the world that Jesus dreamed of is the world that I'm interested in building. That where people are empowered, where poor people are cared for, where there is justice and equality, where empire is torn down. This is the world that I'm interested in looking at, and it's the dream that keeps me coming back to this work, right? And so, we can, like we talked about atonement and forgiveness and sin. I look back on my life and the times that I've, either intentionally or unintentionally or out of ignorance or whatever, participated in racism and sexism and homophobia and all this stuff. And to me, I think atonement looks like a few things, right? I mean, atonement looks like the fact that I can go back to the drawing board and I can start over and I can be a new person now as opposed to who I was in the past. That the things that I can now work for justice of those groups and of those issues of oppression that I didn't work toward in the past. And the fact that I do those things, not to say that other people don't do those things for different reasons, but I do those things because of the influence that Jesus has had on my life. And so I come back a lot to I can say Jesus is Lord, and some of my really conservative friends can say Jesus is Lord, and we can both mean it authentically, but it means very different things. Like for me, it's the life and teaching and memory of Jesus that lords over my life and my teaching that I hope guides me in what I'm doing in the world. Whereas somebody else may mean it very literally, that Jesus is on this metaphysical throne up in the sky in this kingdom. We both mean it, and we both mean it in a very real way, but we mean it very differently.
Yeah. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And I would say, like, it's interesting too. It's like to be able to hold a non-negotiable open-handedly is interesting too. It's like you hold your one non-negotiable in a way that creates people or space for people that have that same one, but maybe because someone might say a non-negotiable is the sitting on the throne, right? Like that, because it sounds, and I'm not putting words in your, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like you're saying like the divinity of Jesus is almost not as necessary as the dream of Jesus.
Yeah, well, and I mean, then we have to talk about what do we mean by divinity, right? I mean, like,
it opens up a larger,
so like, is divinity an issue of some metaphysical deity in the sky, right? Or is it something else? I don't know that I have the answer to that, but also like the thing that I've held to for a long time is, if people want to believe in that, if they want to believe in a metaphysical construct in the sky that we lift our hands to and worship when we're moved by like the drums and the acoustic guitar, right? Like that's fine. Like that does not threaten me or bother me at all. But is that or is that not paving a way for you to live your life in a way that's reminiscent of that once you leave the doors of the church?
Yeah, you want action connected to faith.
I do. Yeah, I mean, like if that's helping you become a better person in the way you interact in the world around us, wonderful. If it's not, then
so for you, almost a non-negotiable is actually faith in action. It's like the action predicated to the faith is bigger for you as a non-negotiable.
Yeah, and I think I think that's true, and I think that as Christians, we can't get there without connecting it to the person of Jesus, because Jesus is such a large aspect of our tradition and our teachings. And because I think Jesus is the most prominent example of this that we have in in the scriptures that we consider holy.
Well, I suspect that's helpful to someone listening too, because like what you said, even leading into it, to someone might be like, well, this is the most heretical thing I've ever heard. But as you articulate it more, it's like, well, I might actually, speaking for a listener, be like, I might actually like fall up there closer than I think, right? Like,
sure.
I don't have certain answers on the divinity of Jesus. I don't have certain answers on atonement theology, but I do certainly believe that Jesus should change my life drastically. Like if repentance is just turn into change.
Well, and it's funny sitting here too, because like I've gone through many levels of my deconstruction journey myself, and like I went through a lot of that while I was still in very conservative spaces, and then I thought I was in a very happy place. And then in this last year, being in a more progressive place, I now am like learning the vocabulary that to just better describe the ways that I've felt my whole Christian life as an adult. Like, and so while you were talking about a lot of that stuff, like there were things that I was like, yeah, like that makes sense. And there were things I was like, whoa, like pump the brakes. Like, and so like, I was like, that was like a roller coaster of emotions, like listening to you talk. Cause like, I'm still working through a lot of those things. So like half of that made sense to me, and half that I'm like, I'm going to go like cry in a cave now because you just like wrecked my brain. Yeah. So that's really cool. So I'm just so sorry for like being quiet for the last like 15 minutes.
The cool thing though is like, shouldn't that be what theological discourse is? It should spur us to curiosity. Right?
Oh, absolutely. Like, yeah, I talked about this in our last episode of the Progressive Pastor podcast that we recorded. Like it's when I started my deconstruction journey, like working in very conservative places and having that as my background, like those were kind of like the materials that I would read as I like studied. But I knew that I was leaning in a different direction, so I was purposely trying to find very progressive pieces of literature and writings and teachings that I could go on. And then as I progressed, then that's kind of where I leaned. But I still wanted to read and refer back to different conservative types of reading, because I want to know where that person's at also. Yeah. And to be able to have a conversation with them. So like if I'm going to have a conversation with person A, that is very conservative, how can I appropriately understand from a viewpoint of where they're coming from if I am not educating myself also on what they're educating on? Doesn't mean I have to agree with it, but because at the same time, like I would want them to educate themselves on what I believe at the same time, not expecting them to agree with it, but like at least just see where I'm coming from. And that's just like the optimist in me. Like I want all of us to agree on everything, and like or not necessarily agree on everything, just be okay with us having disagreements, but like at least entertain the thought that, maybe we both can be right.
And be well informed in it, right? Like I remember like when I was in class in my undergrad, like taking the side that no one wanted to, and that I didn't even agree with, because like someone has to defend this person. But also I was like, I'll better know what I believe if I can strongly defend the opposite of what I believe, right? Yeah. And it shouldn't be a threatening point. So But what about for you? So for you, Kyle, like non-negotiable, do you have any?
Not in the terms. I think when you posed this before we started recording, like I think I went a different direction on it.
Okay.
But like so JT like went into this very deep theological stance that he has. Like my thing, and that's kind of what I hinted on. Like, is my stance is just like mutual respect for everybody. Like I can't have theological conversations with people if there's not a mutual understanding of respect for one another, whether it's based on age variance, whether it's based on educational variance, whether it's based on conservative to progressive variance, whatever that is. So when you posed the question to us earlier before we started recording, that's kind of where my brain went to initially. Like it's hard for me to have those moments of conversation if that line of respect is not already there. And vice versa, if you're already in that conversation, then if that respect gets lost, then like that, to me, that's even harder. Is okay, well, we had this moment, and whether you lose it for me or I lose it for you, then I spend most of my time like, instead of focusing on what could be a really great conversation that could challenge us both to learn and grow, now my head is reeling of what happened on the personal side of things. And then so it just becomes lost at that point.
Yeah. Well, even like watching your guys' dynamic, I would say like that's one thing I've observed as an outsider, like watching like whether it's recording a podcast or getting drinks together. It's like you guys, I bet you guys don't agree on 100% on everything, but you guys do, and you cut up and you make fun of each other and you do whatever. But it's like you guys have this mutual respect that I think you couldn't make fun of each other. You couldn't be light. You couldn't have deep theological conversations. And but oftentimes we don't put ourselves in space, and not to say you guys disagree on a bunch of stuff or agree on it, but like we often don't put ourselves in those situations because there's not a mutual respect, or we're afraid of it, or we're unwilling to cultivate it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we definitely do have some disagreements on some things, but at the same time too, I think that we maybe align more than where we're at, and I'm gonna regret saying this for a moment because I'm gonna give JT a little bit of credit, but like you just have had longer experience just in being in progressive circles like this and having a voice in it, and I think just being, you're gonna totally use this again. You're gonna use this against me, but like I feel intimidated sometimes, like sitting in this space with you because you have better verbiage to describe some of these things. Like these are all things that like I've wanted to know how to say. I just don't know how to articulate it, and I haven't been in spaces like this long enough to learn that vocabulary. So really my last year of being a Concord Trinity has been just like I've just been trying to be a sponge and like learn from people, like from both of you guys, like because you guys are both just very well spoken on a lot of these things. Danny more than you, but well, he's older, so that's why.
You are older. Yeah.
I'm an old man.
More
I will say
seasoned.
though, you do, JT, you speak the language. I mean, intimidated, I sometimes feel the same way, like, but not because I'm like afraid you're going to be a jerk or something, but like
I'm very much afraid of that.
You speak the language well. Like you are someone that like, if you think about it in a different context, like if I speak English and I go to Mozambique, and like I'm going to try to speak, and it's like, well, I don't speak Portuguese, speak a little Spanish, and some translates, right? Like you're someone that goes like, I speak Portuguese fluently, and you're in. Like you know the vernacular well. And so sometimes, which I think is, and this isn't an indictment on you, but it's actually one of the things that can sometimes stop people though, is like people perceive knowledge and verbiage as like hubris and like arrogance. And it's like, just because you can speak the language doesn't mean you're arrogant about it. It's like, no one thinks that about any like English, Spanish, Portuguese, whatever. But in theological language, which is a language of its own, people get afraid to jump in because they don't know the language.
Well, and I would say it took me a while in ministry to learn, when and where to employ this language versus using different language, and when to be, like the first 6 months or so that I spent in parish ministry was like, I just preached such bad sermons because I didn't know how to like everything had to be precisely theologically exactly, and I've learned, not only has my, my collection of non-negotiables narrowed, I would say, over the course of time, but also this was a learning curve for me, that like I have a certain language and a certain vernacular from having gone to school and spent time with these people and devoted years of my life to this kind of education. And other people don't have that, and that's not bad that they don't have that. It's just, it's different. And so, like taking a a page out of Paul's book, right? Like, how do we be all things to all people? How do we do what Paul did, like in Acts 17, and point to like this random statue and be like, let me use this as a way to talk about this thing that
I use that example ad nauseum to talk. People are like, well, we never contextualize. Like, that's exactly what Paul's doing. And if people don't know the story, right? Like, he's preaching to like the Greek folks, right? And then he's preaching to the Jewish folks.
Yeah.
Same situation, same story, different application.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And we're like, well, we would never contextualize. Like, he is, for lack of a better phraseology, watering down the gospel for one group, and he's overemphasizing it for another group for the sake of translation, right?
Well, sorry.
Oh, no, go on.
I was just going to say, it was funny. So this requires a little bit of backstory. So I'm doing my doctorate at Eden Seminary. Our church leadership council very graciously agreed to help pay some of the tuition on that. And so whenever I finish a final paper or produce something that I'm going to present at a conference or whatever, I send it to our leadership council. And I always tell them, you don't have to read this. I don't expect you to read this or engage in this or whatever. I just want you to know this is what I've been working on for the last 3 or 4 months or whatever at school. And one of our leadership council members is a member of the youth. He's like our youth rep on the council. And so on the mission trip or something last year, I had sent a paper on homiletics, which is the study of preaching. Right?
Which, by the way, he couldn't pronounce that word, which made it even funnier.
Okay, so the title. I remember the title of the paper was "Disruptive Homiletics." It was about like liberationist preaching. Yeah. And Kyle sent me a video of him trying to read this paper out loud to the youth group as like a nighttime, like a bedtime story.
He did every single night before we went to bed. Like, lights out at 11. It was like 10:55. Parker stood up and he's like, "Time to read JT's writings."
Yeah.
And I mean, it was a soon-to-be sophomore just butchering every other word in perfect clarity. I mean, I've been on staff for like 5 days. Like, I started like the 3rd, and this was like July 8th. Yeah. Like, and so like at that moment I was like, I'm gonna fit in just fine here. Like,
was he reading it to be funny?
Yes.
Okay. So
100%. He's well, and part of it too. Like, I'd known JT for a month because he was part of my hiring process, and we had already kind of built a relationship. So he was like, JT's such an idiot. And I was like, I agree, we can be friends. Like, that was kind of the fun part. But so then he would read these things, and I'm like, maybe you're the idiot. I don't know.
Well, it was funny, like, thinking about this conversation, because like that paper was an academic paper written for academics, not written for a member of a youth group who is 15 years old or whatever. Like, so if I were to try to explain the content of that paper to somebody who was not an academic theologian, it would have to be very, very different, right? Yeah. And so, and that's, like I said, it's not good or bad. We don't have to moralize it. It's just a matter of knowing when to employ that skill, when to employ certain language over another. And you can still be, I think, very precise and particular, even if you're not using super technical language. And I think, like, if people kind of feel the permission to try to articulate what you're feeling, eventually you'll get there, right? Eventually you'll find the thread along the way, and you'll know kind of where you're going with it.
Which, like, I think relationships like that are really cool, because, like, I've never been much of a reader. Like, when reading has always kind of been like a torturous thing to me, because I very much have undiagnosed ADHD. So like the idea of sitting down to read a book it like wrecks my brain.
I didn't know you knew how to read.
I didn't until like recently. Yeah, I left the Baptist church and it was like boom, like you know how to read. So but like I would try to every now and then, but like honestly, like being in this space like has really given me like the encouragement to want to read, because now I'm like, okay, I finally get it now, and I'm in a space where I can vocalize these things that I've been thinking and dreaming about for 3+ years, especially at this point now. And so it's like JT has kind of like given me like that encouragement just in building our relationship. I'm saying so much that's going to be weaponized against me, but
I'm going to listen to this on repeat.
Guy? You probably will. What's that?
You're a words of affirmation guy?
No, I definitely am. I need to be told that I'm doing a good job.
Well, I think though you're saying something that like a lot of people feel. like the reading thing, right? Like, or like diving into sometimes people don't dip a toe into reading theological works or having theological discussion or any of that stuff, not because they don't want to, but they feel so deeply insecure about their ability to like wade into those waters.
Well, and it's so overwhelming at the same time too, because anytime, at least just coming from a conservative space that I'm used to, like anytime that anything challenging got brought up to where like it might be a challenge to your faith and what you believe, whether a good or a bad thing, then like you were like demonized at that point because, you know, how dare you be constructive of what my faith is. And that was always so weird to me. So it almost felt like, especially as somebody who was coming out as like a progressive person, like I could never come forward with some of these like thoughts or revelations, even to like trusted staff members that like I had known for my whole life because, you know, I grew up with them. You know, it was hard to like have those conversations, and there were the few that I could, but not for the majority. And, you know, so it almost like shut me down to want to do more research in that way. And I think that there are spaces like that still exist, that it's like it's not sought after for that reason.
Well, and it's hard to. So for those of our listeners who don't know, I have a book that's under contract that if I don't get it done soon, it's going to kill me. But
you got a foot in the grave.
It's a book. I feel like it.
Yeah.
It's a book about the theological history of racial justice in America. And my goal with that, though, is to write something that threads the needle of accessible in presentation, but academic in quality. And I feel like that's a hard, because you get a lot of accessible stuff and it's just shit content. Or you get a lot of academic stuff that's great, but it's in such a technical vernacular that only insiders can get it, right? And so trying to find resources that are good and that are accessible, but also are, the content is tight and it's well researched and it can be presented to people in a way in layman's terms that they don't need to have a degree in this to understand it. Yeah. That's hard to find. And like, I don't blame people for like being, that's why I get frustrated that, you know, pastors don't like do more of trying to encourage people to study. They don't, you know, like occasionally, I used to do this more. I will, you know, quote books and sermons and try to, you know, kind of share some of the resources that I've worked with that I found to be relatively accessible, because I think, you know, we kind of know where to look and I think, you know, some of our lay people who may be interested, they just don't know where to start. Right?
Well, and I will say, you've sent me a couple of your chapters just to kind of pre-read, which has been really enjoyable. And I just finished reading Colby's book, Unclobber, after listening to you the weekend that he was there at the well, and very similar types of writing, like talking about like dismantling the 6 clobber passages in scripture sounds so intimidating, but I really enjoyed his way of writing through it because it, you know, I liked the personal aspects of his book and like how this applies to his life and his journey through going through this process. And then I enjoyed like the academic side of it and made it much more easier to swallow. Yeah. Because he would tie it in, and like every chapter is so well thought out, and you know he has the follow-up questions in the book like to use as like discussion times, and like I could use those for myself. You know, my wife, who didn't even read the book, I would ask her questions about it too, just as conversation starters. And I enjoyed that you kind of had that same kind of style with what you wrote, not to shamelessly plug.
You've never been this nice to me.
I know. This is really weird.
We need to record with Danny more often.
Maybe,
it's the only time I get affirmation from
Kyle. Yeah.
Well, hey, I want to be cognizant because we have children outside of this podcast that
I
need
do
to be
not.
picked up.
Yeah, I still have a life.
Depending on when this gets released, you might.
I shouldn't speak too soon. Yeah.
But this was fun, and in perfect Danny form, I pushed this up to the limit without having to show any of my cards, and so I was just able to facilitate the conversation.
I just realized that. This is great.
But I appreciate that.
Oh man, part 2 coming soon.
Part 2 coming soon. Yeah. But here's how I wanted to end. You guys with the Progressive Pastor podcast end with the question, which is what keeps you coming back. And I was serious when I said this beforehand. I want to know.
I was hoping you weren't.
What, instead of what keeps you coming back, what almost stops you from coming back?
Oh man.
We
have to be careful with this.
I don't have to be.
Okay, go for it.
What are they going to do? Are they going to fire? They're not going to
fire
me.
No, they won't.
They might, actually.
They might. Yeah.
I'll take a page actually out of Martin Luther King's book for this. You know, he famously said it's not the Ku Klux Klaner that's the real danger to the black community. It's the white moderate. And so I'll kind of take that logic and say it's not even the people that are, you know, on the other side of the spectrum as me, who are totally opposite of what I think, or, you know, to me, because those are the minorities, right? I mean, like, I don't think that the people who are extremists on the other side are the people that are going to really make a dent. It's all the people in the middle that refuse to be stretched and refuse to grow and don't want to be challenged and want to be comfortable and all those things. I mean, that I think is the hardest part of ministry. Is
almost indifference, right?
Yeah, just like, you know, I have a good thing going here. This is where I come to see my friends, and this is where I do XYZ, and I get enough of this stuff in the news during the week. I don't want to hear about political stuff here, whatever. Like, you know, it's that kind of stuff of the people that are just apathetic and disinterested in what I would say is the moral and ethical responsibility of the church, that really, really challenges me. And it, you know, and I know no church is monolithic, right? Every church has some of these people. Every church has people on either ends of that spectrum.
Right.
But I think the seasons that get entrenched in working with those folks are the times that really, really make me question what, you know, what my role is in the work of the church here.
Yeah,
that's what I struggle with. Yeah.
I think I'm kind of in the same vein. I should really stop letting you talk before me, because you just say it way better than I will. Like I think satisfaction is the word that I was leaning towards, but it's in the same way. Like I don't ever want to be in a place in anything that I do in my life to where I'm just 100% satisfied, because when you're satisfied with something, that means that you've kind of almost in a way given up, and that you're not willing to keep going forwards. Like, I don't ever want to be satisfied in my marriage. I don't want to be satisfied as a father and just be complicit at that point, to not want to continue to push myself to be better. You know, I think satisfaction can kill a lot of really good things, because we're like, oh, we have a good thing going, let's just pause and catch our breath. Like, we all worked really hard to get here, so let's just, you know, say, you know, 2 months, like let's relax a little bit, and that's where things die. You know, so I don't want to work. I don't want to work in an organization that, whether it's if I stay in church work or if I ever move to a nonprofit or whatever that may be, like I don't want to work somewhere that is satisfied in what they're doing. Like, I want to constantly like push the barriers to move forward, to try new things. I also want to not be afraid of failure when we try new things. I think that's why, especially in church settings, I think that's why a lot of churches maybe get to that satisfied place, is they're not willing to take the risk to step forward into new action.
It's safe, right? It feels safe in the moment.
Safe is good. But like at the same time, it's not. Safe is what can, you know, kill an organization.
Yeah.
So I want to be somewhere that, you know, we are going to do uncomfortable things and have uncomfortable conversations, you know, and we may have a distaste for each other for a little bit because of that. But I also know that it goes back to the respect thing. Like, I still respect you as a pastor or a constituent, that, you know, we can continue to move forward and do the work, and that we will get to the end goal. And it's not about right or wrong. It's just, these are the opinions that I bring to the table, you know, and, you know, this is why I think that we can move forward with that. And that's what I think that we need to do.
Yeah.
And the opinions you bring forward to the table right now.
Correct.
Right?
I may change on that.
Yeah, like I look back at papers and sermons and shit from 5 years ago, and I just totally disagree with some of the stuff I say, right? And so, and I think that's like a permission too, is like, just because you think something, I try to hold my stuff loosely in that, like,
even your own beliefs, right?
Yeah, like in 10 years down the line, I could think something very differently about this.
Exactly.
And
that's good. Well, for me, I'd say entitlement is the thing that's hard for me. I think that following Jesus, whatever you think that looks like at the highest level, like, I think that there's a level of like surrender and sacrifice. And I think oftentimes in the church, some of us might find ourselves exempt from surrender and exempt from sacrifice. And I also say that with a caveat, like, that has been used to manipulate and harm people. And so it's like, I get why people are fearful of such things. Yeah. But I also do believe, like, if the church is pandering to us and hyper comfortable to us, if we can just be the person in the middle, not in like we can just be I think that's an entitled belief system that means I don't have to move anywhere, and it's like this thing is designed for me, by me, and with only me in mind. And that's the kind of stuff. It's like I'm very evangelical in the best sense. Like I want more people to like experience the good news.
Yeah.
And I think entitlement is what stops it with us.
For me, by me, and with me in mind, you just described the way America was set up by white men.
And that's the way that you wish it was still today.
That was good. I can't even.
Yeah.
The comedic timing on that was phenomenal.
Thank you.
Usually it's the other way around when you guys walk each other into that.
I know, yeah.
Well, before anyone says anything that gets himself canceled,
good idea.
Yeah, perfect.
I would first say, obviously, if you're new to the podcast, very big jokes between you two right now.
I don't know what you're talking about, where you take everything super seriously.
Yeah.
But I'm going to let you guys send us out. So the Deconstruction Zone, you can find us on TikTok, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts, on YouTube. At the Deconstruction Zone Pod is how to find us. But maybe you're a progressive pastor podcast person.
Yeah, and you can find us on all social media platforms, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And you can subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts, with more platforms coming soon, potentially some video elements
Video
coming soon, maybe by summer. So we'll have some exciting things rolling soon. But thanks, guys, for joining us this week on the podcast, and we will see you guys next time.